Hi, I'm Tom Burton and I am the publisher for the Mandarin, and today we're speaking to Emmanuel Alfieris, who's the Executive Director with the Commonwealth Bank, looking after government, health, education and social infrastructure. Welcome, Emmanuel.
Thank you, Tom.
Emmanuel's better known as Manny, so I'm going to talk to him as Manny. Today we'd like to talk about innovation, and particularly innovation around transactional platforms. In the context, as we know, is governments really looking at service and how they provide service across these big digital platforms. As we think about that, what are the changes in transactional platforms that we're seeing that could be useful for government to think about?
That's a good question. I think the major thing that we're seeing, certainly in the last 2 years, is the transition from online to mobile. And you've probably seen it in your own lives, and our customers are absolutely doing that. And the way they want to interact with banking or their media or indeed their daily lives is with a mobile platform. And certainly our clients, the majority of their interactions with us is with mobile. And I think it's fair to say government and mobile is probably not at the same level.
Yeah, work in progress, as they say, classically. Yeah. And then in the back end, we're starting to see some big changes in platforms, real-time data, etc. What are some of those features? Just to sort of paint that out for government, the sort of changes we're seeing in transactional technologies.
That's a good point. Certainly in banking, real-time has really evolved quite a bit, and there's a whole industry program at the moment to try and make more real-time payments, which is called the New Payments Platform, NPP, typical banking acronym, and that's going to happen in the next couple of years. But the key initiative that you're seeing in banks like ours is giving people real-time information in the environment that they need it. So it's all around being relevant in a particular life cycle and relevant in a particular time of day. It's important for our retail clients, it's important for our retailers, and it's important for our corporates who are trying to make decisions. And indeed, our government clients are using that data as well, particularly in managing their intraday liquidity, which in a volatile environment, and particularly with the new regulatory regime on how deposits are handled, liquidity management at the moment is lends itself to real-time information so you can make smarter decisions.
Right. And I assume as we get better understanding real time and its consequences, we'll see other benefits from that, planning type benefits, and be able to look back at data that was involved. As I understand, I think you had some work you did with the Vibe festival here, and some of the data that came out of that was
the Vivid Festival. So we capture information, and we think on average between 4 in every transactions we get to see as a bank. So we have a good franchise in people that hold CBA credit cards, and we have a great franchise of merchants who use our facilities to be relevant to their clients. So either as a payer or as a receiver, we're able to see something like 40% of the transactions. So we're able, for example, in the Vivid Festival, to demonstrate to government the investment return they got from the festival. Because the government spends millions of dollars a year hosting this thing. Part of the reason for doing that is economic activity. We were able to demonstrate that. So we showed spend in the precincts before the festival, during the festival, and after the festival. And able to demonstrate that there was indeed an uplift of activity, the average spend individuals made on the precinct. And what was interesting is prior to us being part of that program, they used survey data. And the survey data on average spend was actually understated.
Right.
By about 20%.
Okay.
So that was one of the interesting things about having real data versus backward-looking.
Yeah, and if I was sort of extending that observation, every big city in Australia has festivals, every small town has festivals. All of a sudden you've got data to understand the economic benefit of it and how much you invest in it from a public sector perspective.
Yeah. And we've done 2 or 3 regional festivals since, so to give the local government real insights as to what activities bringing into their town.
One of the trends we're seeing obviously is a real shift to self-service, and here I wanted to ask about the sort of, if you like, feature sets almost that are coming in at the transactional level. You've released the Albert point of sale, I think. What's the consequences of that for government around self-service and its ability to reach out to customers in, if you like, non-government environments almost?
Yeah, that's a good point. So Gold Coast City Council is one of our clients, and they have a twice a year land rate regime. So they would get these huge queues at the few offices, the service offices that people were lining up to make the payment. So things like enabling individuals not having to present a bill with an individual, present a bill to a mounted terminal was one way we delivered some self-service. And then we extended that into, giving concierge the opportunity to go along the queues with new technology, so you didn't have to go to a counter, it would be an interactive process. And the next iteration of that was, well, it doesn't have to be specifically in the 2 or 3 offices that the council has. Right. So they opened the libraries as a potential place to make payments. And again, a mounted terminal there with cameras and scanners and so forth. Right. User-friendly technology like any tablet, and people were able to do that. Right. Sorry, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say that's a huge gain, for government, because it doesn't have to be setting up new offices or putting infrastructure out there. And it can just place these terminals into various strategic environments. It's a massive gain.
And these terminals, the new Albert terminals that you mentioned, they're an Android tablet, and they've got some smarts around payments, but they're essentially an Albert Android tablet. And that means just like you can download an app to your Android phone, you can download an app to this Albert terminal. So it doesn't have to be a hardwired infrastructure. You could tell the local businesses, if they want to accept the local council payments during that peak period, just download the app and enable them to also execute payments. So you can
very
see
different model, isn't it?
Yeah, it's about enabling an ecosystem rather than enabling an individual position or a store.
And presumably different agencies could play on the same platform, could they? So this same delivery system could be looking after the Department of Main Roads and the forests and whoever.
Exactly, and you just had an app for each. And anyone effectively could be a front office counter for those that still don't want to pay online or through other means.
Right, that's a big change, isn't it? And I think a real change for government is traditionally had this sort of build it, big network, put it out there. Whereas you say you can turn it into almost an application environment where you just build the application. Interesting point there is, I think, government's learning to work with big providers. Commonwealth Bank's obviously a big institution with a lot of depth, plays in this space. It's just, the model is, how can government work with big organisations on these sort of design questions? Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, that's a good question, because we're a big organisation ourselves, and we had the same dilemmas about shifting systems and made big investments in that. And we had to work with big organisations to get that outcome. I think for big organisations that have lots of relationships, commercial relationships across the board, it's actually a good, safe way to start innovating and going down new paths. Right. Because, I'll give an example. We're, I think, the largest SAP house in the Southern Hemisphere. Right. And, working with SAP on all sorts of fronts on innovation. There was herd capital in them making sure that they were doing the right thing by us, and there were resources placed on the new things that we were doing, and vice versa. We had made a big investment in SAP, so we wanted to leverage that capability to enable things like what we now enable with our payments regime that I talked about earlier. And real time, for example.
Real time.
Real time was a good the real drive, or one of the real benefits of having one platform that's on all the time. So for government, the lesson, I guess, is having those relationships that you understand the individuals, you understand their capability, and there is more herd capital that people will bring resources when things go wrong or a little astray, as they do when you innovate, is actually, I think, the right path for big organisations before they start experimenting with the smaller organisations. And that's certainly how we've started. Our main innovation started with our big partners, and now we started taking some things in-house and being able to deal with smaller partners as well.
Right.
So it is a transition to comfort and understanding and learning from each other.
Yeah, that's a powerful insight, because I think where government's struggle is they've been told to innovate. The government hierarchical system is not a natural incubator for that sort of thing. So the real innovation is going to come from working with big providers and suppliers. Yeah. And then, if you like, fleshing that ecosystem out and somehow working that design.
Yeah. And we have, for example, with the government, a relationship which, there is a separate innovation fund and there's a steering group, and we work together to drive innovation for that particular state government.
Yep.
It's part of the contract.
Right.
Yeah.
Actually making it.
Yeah.
As we know, for example, government's looking, for example, in the context of Medicare, the actual transactional system. And to me, that's a good example where you could work with multiple providers to come up with different solutions.
And more than one provider.
Yes.
So if you think about Medicare, it's a whole ecosystem: doctors, patients, the payment system, the departments, various departments that play at different times.
Yep.
So certainly our position, and we've shared this with government through the different discussion papers that we've sent, is that taking an ecosystem approach and enabling players to deliver their best of breed capability into the ecosystem gives the government more flexibility. They can leverage investments made by all the ecosystem, and you get quicker outcomes on the ground.
Just talking about another issue, the issue of security. Bank obviously plays strongly in that. What sort of trend changes are you seeing in security? Now, I ask this question because government's got this big cyber review on federally, and all governments are starting to take this piece very seriously, and you guys have got a long pedigree in this space. What are some of the changes you're seeing?
But some of the things that we're beginning to appreciate, not that we've implemented this yet, but the current trends that we're seeing is that having a centralized database where you lock it down like a fortress in both virtual and physical environments is actually acting in some ways as a honeypot for hackers or people that want to do mischief. And one way to avoid that is to disperse that framework in an encrypted and smart way, so it's hard to find. But if you disperse it, it's quite more difficult to hack. And even if you do hack, being able to change the real version of the truth is hard because you have to coordinate with all the other services. Now, I know that sounds counterproductive initially in the old framework because we've spent millions of dollars consolidating our 18 databases into two, right? And now we're thinking, okay, that was important to get a single source of truth. Now with the new capability, a single source of truth, as long as it's coordinated, then you can have a defrayed ledger or dispersed ledger. And that's really what blockchain effectively is doing in some of the trials that you're seeing around the world with the banks trying to use blockchain as a way to make interbank transactions, where everyone has a ledger rather than you having a ledger and another bank having a ledger and another bank having a ledger and a clearinghouse in between trying to coordinate it all.
And so the very model of, if you like, a distributed architecture becomes quite powerful, doesn't it, and has a natural analogue. I think in that area of, say, authentication and identity too, you can start seeing how a distributed model...
That's a great point, and it's part of our dialogue with government, is there's all these people that sit and identify individuals. So we'll identify you if you're a client. If you try to do something with the government, want to get a driver's license, they'll identify you, and they'll use bank documentation to help as part of that identity. You want to get a passport, there's another identification. So if there's a trust regime where, I trust the government is doing the right job, the government trusts the banks are doing the right job, and the banks trust the post office for doing the right job, then we don't actually need to be identifying the same person lots of times. Because what effectively is happening is they're taking each other's documents and presenting it to each other, when really we can enable a better customer experience by talking to each other around the trusted identity.
Then having some sort of brokered exercise in the middle somehow. That's a really good example. And it's a big picture example, but it's very current for government. As we know, everyone's starting, as governments join up these services, and citizens are saying, we just want to be able to come in and tell government once. We don't want to tell them many times. We want to have you put together all the services rather than have an alphabet of agencies we have to deal with. Then this becomes really important.
And you're seeing organisations like Service New South Wales saying when clients are coming in, yes, they appreciate this is a state government entity, but they get questions, can I do something for the federal government or can I do something for the local government? And they're going, well, not quite yet, but I know organisations like them are thinking through how they can be a one-stop shop for all of government, not just the state.
On that sort of one-stop shop idea, one of the things that you people obviously done a lot of is branch design and thinking about that. Are there any observations around branch design? Because governments are rethinking their service front end and how their offices look. Any observations?
That's a great question because a lot of what we're talking about is technology innovation. The biggest innovation that I've seen, and technology is sort of a derivative of that, is customer-centric design. Right. So designing our branches, for example, in the way customers want to use that interaction and experience that interaction. So that's got nothing to do with technology.
Right.
That's about understanding what your clients want and how they want to experience the world in a physical environment like the branch. So, and we've taken that approach for our branches, for our new products, for our new apps, and using that approach to design not just the physical elements of the space, but the aesthetic as well. So Albert, that we talked about earlier, that was an 18-month iterative process to make it look and feel nice, and how our clients would be using it on the floor.
Right.
So the likes of IDEO helped us design that.
Yep.
Very Apple-esque.
And that's a beautiful machine. Yeah, and everyone talks about it when you walk in. Everyone says, "Oh, it's an interesting machine." That service, if you like, service design issue, user-centred, is something certainly government's really woken up to. And again, it's another good example where I think they could tap experiences people. Big organisations have done that. I think it's a real win for everyone. So.
And taking that little extra step, like the aesthetic is really interesting because, and this was customer-centric design, we noticed, because we sit out and watch our clients, and we noticed, those old 1980s terminals, and they're still around. In fact, even if they look new, they're still 1980s technology. After the sale, the retail assistant would take it and put it under the counter.
Right.
And we sort of asked, well, why is that? Why are you doing it? Well, we've got a beautiful store here, a nice counter. This just
doesn't look
the aesthetics aren't nice.
Yeah.
So that triggered us to say, well, this machine has to be both functional and aesthetically pleasing to the eye.
Yep. And for a lot of people visiting government offices, it's not something you're doing voluntarily. They're having to visit, so it's got that sort of thing, Just looking over the horizon then, Manny, just in looking at this sort of transactional space, just to focus on that, perhaps end off the interview, what are some of the changes you can see starting to happen looking over the horizon?
I think the whole concept of using an ecosystem to deliver outcomes will and has to come to play. We as a bank, as much as we invest in our technology and our platforms, we know we can't do it ourselves, so we collaborate. Right. We talk about Albert. Albert was a collaboration with Windorf-Nixon, and we've done a deal where we've enabled them to use our capability and technology globally as long as we have the rights in our markets.
Right.
And that was a collaboration. So I think governments in particular leveraging the investments the banking sector is making in interactions with clients. And much of the interaction with government is payment related in some way, or at least information related. And the bank does that every day, all the time.
Right.
Which is in a platform that's now easier to plug into other platforms.
Right.
So I couldn't have told you this 5 years ago, for example, when our systems were a spaghetti diagram.
Yep.
Now they're not. So that interface is now much easier, and you enable a couple of things. One is leverage the investments that the sector's making, but two, you can actually get outcomes in a user-friendly way that people are happy to engage with, whether it's technology or experience on the ground or in a life cycle moment that is relevant to them on the spot.
Yeah. An important piece I'm hearing there is when you start, as governments move into this area, replicate the models which you've been thinking about, which is much more open environments, therefore allows ecosystems to develop and play. And you have bigger players like yourself, but you have other smaller players. And as government seeks to tap that sort of, if you like, entrepreneurial energy and innovation, that's the way it starts thinking.
And getting back to your security question, the security tools now enable that to be a much more tighter environment. So there are smart ways to secure information without having to physically have it centralised.
Right, so the technology is starting to help us there. Isn't it? Yeah. All right. Well, thank you very much, Manny. Very useful.
My
Thank
pleasure.
you.
Thanks. Take care.